I'm a 32-year-old guy, and a few months ago, my life took a turn I didn't fully anticipate. After years of grinding it out at work, staying late, taking on extra projects, and proving myself, I landed a massive promotion. Not just a bump in title, but the kind that came with a paycheck that doubled my salary. I was over the moon. Finally, I could see my long-term goals, buying a house, building up savings, and maybe even taking a real vacation, becoming a reality. Naturally, I wanted to share the good news with my family. That's where things got complicated. I shared the announcement in our family group chat. It was a simple message, just something like, "Hey everyone, I've got great news, I got promoted at work," along with some generic excitement about how it was a big step for me. At first, the responses were what you'd expect. Lots of congrats and so proud of you. My younger brother Tyler, who's 28, even chimed in with a "that's awesome, bro," which felt nice. But then, not even a minute later, he followed up with, "So how much are they paying you now?" That question hit me like a curveball. I know Tyler pretty well, and he's always been a bit, let's call it opportunistic. I brushed it off with something vague, saying it was enough to make life more comfortable. I didn't want to dive into numbers, but Tyler wasn't one to let things go. A few hours later, he texted me privately saying he'd been struggling with rent lately and might need to move back in with our parents if things didn't improve. Now, I'm not heartless. I get that rent is tough, especially in this economy, but Tyler has always had a habit of getting himself into financial messes. He's had jobs before, decent ones, but he doesn't stick to a budget. He's always got some subscription service, new gadget, or expensive hobby draining his wallet. Still, I told him I was sorry to hear he was struggling and hoped he'd find a way to sort things out. That's when he dropped the big one. "Could you spot me for a couple of months? Just until I'm back on my feet." I was floored. My promotion wasn't even 24 hours old, and Tyler was already asking for money. I tried to keep it polite, saying I had plans for my income and couldn't commit to helping him out. His response? "Come on, you're making so much now. A few $100 a month won't even dent your paycheck." Things snowballed from there. Tyler wasn't shy about voicing his disappointment, and soon enough, my parents were weighing in too. They didn't outright demand I help him, but they weren't subtle either. My mom, in particular, loves her go-to line, "Family helps family." Isn't that what we're supposed to do? When I tried to explain that I had financial goals like saving for a down payment on a house, they seemed surprised, almost offended. My mom asked why I'd prioritize a house over helping Tyler, and my dad said something about how I should be grateful to be in a position to give back. It was clear they thought I was being selfish. Meanwhile, Tyler started pulling out all the stops, accusing me of rubbing my success in his face. He said I was acting like I was too good for the rest of the family now. At this point, I wasn't just dealing with Tyler. The entire situation started to bleed into every aspect of my life. I confided in a close friend, someone who knows Tyler's track record, and they gave me a piece of advice that stuck. Set boundaries now, or you'll regret it later. They suggested I look up stories about people dealing with entitled family members. That's how I ended up in the rabbit hole of Reddit posts about sibling drama, financial boundaries, and the fallout that comes from saying no to people who think they're entitled to your money. Reading those stories was like looking into a crystal ball. There was a clear pattern. People who kept giving and ended up resentful and broke, while the ones who stood their ground faced temporary backlash but eventually found peace. It gave me some clarity about what I needed to do. Meanwhile, Tyler wasn't letting up. Every time we talked, the conversation circled back to his rent. He even tried to frame it as a way I could invest in him. His logic? If I helped him get through this rough patch, he'd be able to focus on finding a better job. He said, "You wouldn't even feel it, but it would change my life." When I didn't budge, things took an uglier turn. He called me out in our family group chat, saying I was hoarding wealth and turning my back on the people who supported me when I was struggling. The guilt trips were relentless. My mom chimed in with her classic line about how I used to babysit Tyler when we were kids, saying, "You've always looked out for him. Why stop now?" The whole thing left me so frustrated that I decided to put my story out there. I wanted an outsider's perspective to make sure I wasn't being unreasonable. So here I am, sharing this. I'm just trying to figure out if standing firm on my boundaries really makes me the bad guy, or if this is just what happens when you finally start prioritizing yourself. Update 1. After I told Tyler I wouldn't be covering his rent, the silence was immediate. No more texts, no calls, nothing. At first, I thought he might have accepted my decision, but I quickly realized it was the kind of silence that wasn't meant to last. Sure enough, my parents called the next evening. They didn't come right out and demand I pay Tyler's rent, but the disappointment in their voices was impossible to miss. My mom started with, "Tyler's going through a tough time," which quickly shifted into, "I don't understand why you're being so stingy when you're doing so well now." I tried to explain that Tyler's finances weren't my responsibility, but my mom didn't seem interested in hearing it. She went into full guilt mode, bringing up how I used to babysit Tyler when we were younger, how I'd always looked out for him, and how family is supposed to stick together. My dad stayed quiet for most of the call, which honestly made things worse. He wasn't siding with me, but his silence felt like a passive agreement with everything my mom was saying. The pressure was starting to creep into other parts of my life. At work, I found myself distracted during meetings, replaying the arguments in my head. Tyler wasn't letting up either. He began sending me walls of text about how hard things were for him, detailing every financial struggle. He painted me as the bad guy, emphasizing that I had more than enough to help him and accusing me of being heartless. Each message felt like it was designed to make me cave, but I held firm. Then, Tyler took things public. He posted a vague status on social media, something about siblings who forget their roots and think money makes them better than everyone else. He didn't mention me by name, but the timing made it obvious. A few mutual friends reached out, asking what was going on, and I realized Tyler was trying to rally sympathy for his side. It was frustrating, but I wasn't about to engage in a public back and forth. Instead, I leaned on my close friends, who reminded me I wasn't in the wrong. One of them even joked, if he has time to post on social media, he has time to find a second job. A week later, my parents called again, this time to invite me to a family dinner. I knew what it was really about, but I went anyway, hoping to at least clear the air. As soon as I walked in, the tension was palpable. My mom wasted no time bringing up Tyler's situation, talking about how he was on the verge of losing his apartment and how it wasn't fair for him to move back in with them when I had the means to help. Tyler jumped in, proposing a solution. If I covered his rent for 6 months, he'd be able to get back on his feet. He framed it as a temporary arrangement, like he was doing me a favor by keeping the timeline short. At that point, I decided to ask some questions. I wanted to know exactly where his money was going if he was so strapped for cash. He reluctantly admitted to things like multiple streaming subscriptions, a gym membership at a boutique fitness center, and regular takeout meals. It was clear he wasn't prioritizing necessities, which made his demands even harder to swallow. When I pointed this out, he got defensive, claiming I didn't understand how expensive life was and how he deserved to enjoy some comforts. Then came the ultimatum. Tyler said if I didn't help him, he'd cut contact entirely. He acted like this was some big punishment, but honestly, it felt more like manipulation. My dad finally spoke up, but instead of taking a stance, he just mumbled something about wanting everyone to get along. It was frustrating to see him stay so neutral when the situation clearly wasn't fair. After the dinner, I decided to post an update on Reddit, sharing everything from Tyler's texts to the family dinner showdown. The responses were a mixed bag. Some people thought I should help, arguing that family comes first, while others fully supported my decision to set boundaries. One comment stuck with me: helping someone who won't help themselves isn't kindness, it's enabling. That summed up exactly how I felt. The fallout from that dinner was immediate. Tyler blocked me on social media, which I honestly considered a blessing at this point. My parents continued to call, urging me to reconsider, but I stopped engaging in the same conversations. My friends encouraged me to keep holding my ground, and I started to focus more on my own goals. It wasn't easy, but I knew this was the only way to avoid being dragged into a never-ending cycle of guilt and entitlement. The family dynamic had shifted, and not in a good way. Tyler had drawn his line in the sand, and I wasn't about to cross it just to appease him. If he wanted to make me the villain of his story, so be it. For now, I'm sticking to my boundaries, even if it means dealing with the fallout. Update 2. Not long after the family dinner, Tyler's financial situation reached a breaking point. He was evicted from his apartment for not paying rent. Apparently, he'd been behind for months, and the landlord finally had enough. Tyler moved back in with my parents, which immediately shifted the pressure onto me. My mom called the same day to let me know Tyler was staying with them temporarily and added that it was hard for them to take on this responsibility. She hinted again that if I just helped him earlier, none of this would have happened. Tyler wasted no time settling in. According to my dad, who slipped this into conversation later, he wasn't contributing to household expenses or chores. Instead, he was playing video games, ordering takeout, and continuing to live as if nothing had changed. My parents began calling me almost daily, asking when I was going to step up and help. I stayed firm, repeating that Tyler needed to take responsibility for himself. Around this time, I got a clearer picture of just how careless Tyler had been with his money. My parents had access to his bank statements now, and my mom let it slip that his spending habits hadn't changed, even after his eviction. He was still paying for multiple streaming services, in-app game purchases, and a gym membership. He was also ordering expensive meals almost every day instead of cooking. When I pointed this out to my parents, my mom brushed it off, saying Tyler was trying to keep some sense of normalcy during a tough time. Meanwhile, Tyler started complaining that he couldn't find steady work. I initially gave him the benefit of the doubt. Job hunting can be rough, but then I learned he was only applying for jobs that offered salaries way above his qualifications. He wasn't even considering entry-level positions or anything that might help him get back on his feet. It became clear that Tyler wasn't struggling to find work, he just didn't want to settle for less than his ideal. As if that wasn't enough, Tyler decided to escalate the situation by dragging an extended family. Suddenly, aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in months were messaging me, asking why I was refusing to help my brother. Tyler had told them a highly skewed version of events, painting me as a greedy, heartless sibling who cared more about money than family. One aunt even sent me a long message about how she'd helped her brother once and how I needed to do the right thing. Then came Tyler's latest demand. He suggested that, as a Christmas gift, I should pay off the remaining balance on his credit card. He pitched it as a win-win, saying it would take a huge weight off his shoulders and bring the family back together. I didn't even dignify that with a response. Instead, I sat down and wrote an email to Tyler, clearly outlining why I wouldn't be giving him money now or in the future. I kept it polite but firm, explaining that his financial issues were his responsibility to solve, not mine. My parents were livid when they found out about the email. They accused me of breaking up the family dynamic and making things worse. My mom said I was creating unnecessary drama by refusing to make a small sacrifice to help Tyler. At this point, I realized I needed professional help to navigate the guilt and pressure. I started seeing a therapist who helped me recognize the manipulative patterns in my family and how to enforce boundaries without feeling like the villain. Tyler, of course, didn't take my email well. He responded by posting screenshots of our conversations on social media. He carefully selected messages that made me look bad while leaving out the parts where he was demanding money. He added captions about how money changes people and how he was disappointed in me for turning my back on him. Some of my colleagues and friends saw the posts and started asking questions, which was humiliating. I decided enough was enough and blocked Tyler on every platform. I also muted my parents for a while to avoid their constant guilt trips. Instead, I focused on self-care and started looking at properties for my first home. It felt good to redirect my energy towards something positive, even if the family drama was still swirling in the background. A silver lining came when one of my cousins reached out privately. She told me she'd been through a similar situation with Tyler years ago. Apparently, he'd borrowed money from her once and never paid it back. She assured me I wasn't alone and said she fully supported my decision to stand firm. I updated Reddit again, sharing everything from Tyler's eviction to his social media antics. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. People shared similar experiences and encouraged me to stick to my boundaries. Some even offered practical advice, like how to protect my finances from family members who might try to exploit me further. For now, I'm staying focused on my goals and keeping my distance from the drama. Tyler can post and complain all he wants, but I'm done letting his issues control my life. Update 3. Things took a wild turn not long after I blocked Tyler on social media. I was at work one day when I got an email from my bank notifying me about an account inquiry. It wasn't a standard alert. I'd never requested any changes. I immediately called the bank, and after a bit of digging, they confirmed someone had tried to access my account using partial personal details. Alarm bells went off. I suspected Tyler, but I couldn't prove it yet. The confirmation came a few days later. I stopped by my parents' house to drop something off, and while I was there, I noticed a stack of mail on the dining table. My name was on one of the envelopes. It was a bank statement, one I'd never received. Tyler had intercepted it. My mom brushed it off, claiming he must have grabbed it by mistake, but I wasn't buying it. When I confronted Tyler directly, he shrugged and said he was just curious about my finances and wanted to see how much I was really making. That was it for me. I left the house and went straight to the police station to file a report for mail theft. The fallout was immediate. My parents were furious. They called me non-stop, accusing me of overreacting and dragging the family into unnecessary drama. My mom said filing a police report was too extreme and begged me to drop it, claiming Tyler was just being nosy and didn't mean any harm. My dad chimed in, suggesting I should handle this internally as a family instead of involving outsiders. But this wasn't just nosiness, it was a violation of my privacy. Meanwhile, Tyler doubled down on his excuses. He claimed he only opened my mail because he wanted to understand why I was so hesitant to help him financially. He spun it as if he had a right to access my information because we're family. The audacity of it all was unreal. I stuck to my guns and kept the police report in place. It didn't lead to immediate charges, but it created an official record of the incident. The stress of it all started to wear on me. Even though I was keeping my distance, the constant guilt-tripping and accusations from my parents weighed heavily. My therapist recommended I consider a restraining order if things escalated further. She also encouraged me to take a month-long no-contact break from Tyler and my parents to focus on my mental health. I decided to give it a shot. During that month, I threw myself into work and even hit a new career milestone. I landed another promotion, which felt like a huge win, but I kept it quiet this time. I didn't post about it or share it with my family. I didn't want to give Tyler any more ammunition. Unfortunately, word got out anyway. Someone at work mentioned my promotion to a mutual family friend, and before I knew it, my mom was calling me, asking why I hadn't told them. When I didn't engage, she accused me of being secretive and said my actions were tearing the family apart. Tyler eventually reached out with what I thought was an apology. He sent me a long text, apologizing for taking my mail and saying he wanted to move forward. But by the end of the message, he was back to his old tricks, asking if I could help him out with some credit card debt to give him a fresh start. It was clear the apology wasn't genuine. It was just another way to manipulate me. I didn't respond and forwarded the message to my lawyer instead. At this point, I'd had enough. I consulted a lawyer about protecting my finances and identity. They helped me set up fraud alerts on my accounts and walked me through steps to ensure Tyler couldn't pull any more stunts. It was a relief to have that layer of protection, but the whole process made me realize how far things had spiraled. Despite everything, I had a strong support system. My friends and colleagues rallied around me, reminding me that prioritizing myself wasn't selfish. A few even shared their own stories about dealing with entitled family members, which helped me feel less alone. One colleague suggested I update Reddit with the latest developments, so I did. The reaction was overwhelming. People were shocked at how bold Tyler had been and unanimously supported my decision to cut ties with him. Some even suggested I go fully no contact with my parents as well, given how much they were enabling him. Tyler's antics didn't stop there, though. After realizing I wouldn't budge, he turned to social media again, posting about how I'd ruined Christmas for the family by refusing to help. It was frustrating, but by this point I'd already blocked him and wasn't engaging anymore. His posts didn't get much traction this time. People seemed to be catching on to his patterns. For now, I'm focusing on moving forward. I've started touring apartments and looking into buying my first home, which feels like a huge step. It's not easy cutting ties with family, but I'm determined to protect my peace. Reddit has been a lifeline through all of this, and seeing so many people rally behind me has been a reminder that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Update 4. The drama with Tyler reached its peak not long after I thought things had finally calmed down. My parents called me one evening, and it was clear they weren't just checking in. They went straight to the point, saying that I needed to reconcile with Tyler. According to them, my decision to cut him off had created a massive rift in the family, and if I didn't make amends, they'd have to reevaluate our relationship. It felt like an ultimatum: either I give in to Tyler's demands or risk being effectively disowned. I didn't argue. Instead, I calmly told them I was done with Tyler and that my decision was final. That conversation marked the point where I officially went no contact with Tyler and significantly reduced contact with my parents. I blocked Tyler everywhere, cutting off any potential for further manipulation. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was necessary. Of course, the backlash was swift. My extended family, many of whom had already been fed Tyler's twisted version of events, rallied to his side. I started getting messages from cousins, aunts, and even a few family friends. They accused me of being heartless, of abandoning my family when I could easily afford to help. I ignored most of it, but I did have a few candid conversations with family members who genuinely wanted to understand the full story. A few of them admitted that Tyler had always been a bit entitled, and that they could see why I had finally drawn the line. During all of this, I had a major realization in therapy. My therapist pointed out how much of my life had been shaped by the toxic dynamics in my family. For years, I'd been enabling Tyler without even realizing it, bending over backward to keep the peace. Recognizing this was a breakthrough for me. It helped me see that setting boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about breaking free from a cycle that had been draining me for years. Then, things took another turn. My lawyer called me with alarming news. Someone had attempted to take out a loan in my name. They had used my information but listed me as a cosigner. Thankfully, the fraud alerts we'd set up flagged the application, and it was stopped before any damage was done. I didn't need to ask who was behind it. Tyler had already proven he was willing to cross boundaries, and this stunt fit his MO perfectly. I met with my lawyer again to tighten the protections on my accounts and ensure my financial records were secure. At the same time, I learned something surprising. I wasn't the only sibling fed up with Tyler. One of my younger siblings reached out, venting about how Tyler had been pestering them for money as well. They admitted they'd given him small amounts in the past to avoid conflict, but had recently stopped after realizing he wasn't taking any steps to improve his situation. Knowing I wasn't alone in this was oddly comforting. Meanwhile, my parents made one last attempt to sway me. My mom called, emotional as ever, and pleaded with me to reconsider. She talked about how hard it was to see the family falling apart, and how much it would mean if I could just find it in my heart to help Tyler. I didn't budge. I told her that I was done being manipulated, and that if she wanted to enable Tyler, that was her choice, but I wouldn't be part of it. Around the same time I hit a personal milestone, I reached my savings goal for a down payment on a house. I didn't announce it to anyone, certainly not my family, but I quietly celebrated the win. It felt good to focus on my own goals, knowing I was finally free from Tyler's constant demands. Tyler, however, didn't seem to be letting up. He continued his social media campaign, posting vague statuses about how hard it was to have a brother who acts like a stranger. He even made a few direct jabs, claiming I'd abandoned him and our parents. I ignored it all. His posts didn't get much engagement this time, and it seemed like people were starting to see through his act. On the brighter side, I started building stronger connections with supportive people in my life. Friends, colleagues, and even a few distant relatives who knew the truth rallied around me. They reminded me that I wasn't a bad person for prioritizing myself. One friend in particular said something that stuck with me: "You're not breaking up the family. You're just refusing to carry their baggage anymore." I updated Reddit again to share the latest developments, including the loan attempt and my decision to go no contact. The support was overwhelming. People validated my choice to protect myself and shared similar experiences, which reinforced that I wasn't alone in dealing with entitled family members. As for Tyler, his antics seemed to be catching up with him. I heard through the grapevine that he'd burned bridges with a few other family members after trying to guilt them into financial help. Even my parents, who had been his biggest enablers, seemed to be growing tired of his behavior. For the first time, it felt like the tables were turning. Now I'm focused on moving forward. I'm finalizing plans to buy my first home and starting to rebuild relationships with the family members who supported me through this. Tyler can continue his games if he wants, but I've made my choice. I'm done being his safety net. It's time to live my life on my own terms. Update 5. After everything that had happened with Tyler and my parents, I made the decision to go low contact with my family. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was necessary for my peace of mind. I stopped taking daily calls from my mom and kept conversations brief when we did speak. My dad, who had mostly stayed neutral throughout this ordeal, also began to reach out less. The distance gave me space to focus on myself for the first time in years. Work became my escape, and I threw myself into it. It paid off in ways I hadn't expected. I was assigned to lead a major project at my company, one that had the potential to make a big impact in my field. The long hours and challenges were tough, but the experience reminded me why I'd worked so hard to get where I was. When the project was successfully completed, it was clear that my career was on an upward trajectory. Meanwhile, I finally took the leap I'd been planning for years. I purchased my first home. It was a modest but beautiful place in a quiet neighborhood, exactly what I'd envisioned. Signing those papers felt like a victory, a tangible reminder of what I could achieve when I focused on my goals instead of being dragged down by other people's expectations. I didn't tell my family about the purchase right away. I wanted to enjoy the moment without any drama or guilt attached. As time passed, I noticed something strange. Tyler stopped trying to contact me. There were no more texts, no attempts to reach out through mutual friends, and no cryptic social media posts. For the first time in months, it seemed like he'd finally accepted the boundaries I'd set. Through the family grapevine, I learned that Tyler was still living with my parents but had started applying for jobs more seriously. He was even considering going back to school, which, if true, was a huge step for him. I didn't hold my breath, but hearing that he might be making changes felt like progress. My parents also began to soften. After months of defending Tyler and pushing me to do the right thing, my mom called one day with an uncharacteristically reflective tone. She didn't outright apologize, but she admitted that they'd put too much pressure on me and that Tyler needed to figure out his own path. My dad, in his understated way, mentioned he was proud of what I'd accomplished. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough to make me feel like we could rebuild our relationship, slowly and on my terms. Therapy remained a cornerstone in my journey. My therapist helped me work through years of ingrained guilt and obligation, and for the first time I felt empowered to live my life without constantly worrying about what others thought. I also realized that my family's expectations had been unreasonable from the start. I wasn't responsible for fixing Tyler's problems, nor was I obligated to sacrifice my success to make others comfortable. Throughout this time, the Reddit community continued to be a source of support and encouragement. I shared updates along the way, and the responses were overwhelmingly positive. People from all walks of life shared their own stories of entitled family members, offering advice and solidarity. Knowing that so many others had faced similar challenges made me feel less alone. To my surprise, some of my extended family members reached out to apologize for taking Tyler's side earlier. They admitted they'd only heard his version of events and hadn't realized the full story. While I didn't dwell on the past, their apologies helped mend some of the rifts that had formed during the height of the drama. One of the most unexpected outcomes was reconnecting with one of my other siblings. We hadn't been particularly close before, but our shared frustrations with Tyler brought us together. We started talking more often, bonding over our mutual experiences with family drama, and finding ways to support each other. As for Tyler, I've heard through mutual contacts that he's still working on himself. He's apparently managed to land a part-time job and is no longer trying to rely solely on my parents for support. Whether he's truly changed or just found a new way to coast through life, I don't know. Either way, it's no longer my concern. I've maintained strict boundaries with my family, and while I've allowed some level of communication, I've made it clear that I won't tolerate any more manipulation or entitlement. In my final Reddit update, I shared my story's conclusion and offered advice to others dealing with similar situations. The responses were heartening, with many thanking me for being so transparent about my journey. Some even shared how my story had inspired them to set boundaries in their own lives. Looking back, I can see how far I've come since this all began. What started as a simple promotion celebration spiraled into a chaotic battle over boundaries and entitlement, but it also taught me invaluable lessons about standing up for myself. I'm finally free to enjoy my success without guilt, and for the first time, I feel a deep sense of peace. This chapter of my life is closed, and I'm ready to move forward, focusing on the life I've worked so hard to build. Thank you to everyone who followed along and supported me. You've been a big part of my journey toward freedom and healing. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and if there's one thing I've learned about my family, it's that expectations are always a one-way street. They expect me to drop everything for them, no matter the inconvenience, no matter the cost, and when I don't, I'm the bad guy. But let's rewind a bit. A few months ago, my younger sister Emma announced her wedding date. The whole family was ecstatic. Group chat blowing up, my parents already talking about how beautiful it was going to be. I was happy for her, sure, but we've never been particularly close. Emma has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. She was spoiled growing up, used to getting her way, while I was the one expected to be responsible and handle things without complaint. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's getting married. That's great. I figured I'd show up, sit through the ceremony, maybe give a quick toast, and that would be that. Simple. I was so wrong. The wedding wasn't just a wedding, it was an event. A week-long, multi-location, outrageously expensive event. Destination wedding, high-end venue, designer outfits required. A schedule so packed it looked more like a corporate retreat than a celebration. And Emma, she wasn't just a bride, she was a full-blown bridezilla. Her first message to the family wasn't a simple save the date. Nope, it was an itinerary. A full PDF breakdown of every event leading up to the wedding. There was a spa day for the bridal party mandatory, a private family dinner 2 days before the ceremony mandatory, a rehearsal event at some exclusive club mandatory, and of course the wedding itself also mandatory. But here's the kicker. Attending wasn't just a time commitment, it was a financial one. Flights, hotel stays, rental cars, dress code requirements, everything had to be approved by Emma. No off-the-rack suits, no budget-friendly options. If I wanted to attend, I needed to shell out thousands. And when I say needed, I mean expected. Because in Emma's mind, there was no discussion. This was her big day, and anything less than full participation meant I didn't care about her. I tried to be reasonable. I asked if I could just attend the wedding itself, given that I had work obligations and a life. That did not go over well. No, you have to be there for everything, she said. It's not just a wedding, it's an experience. An experience, more like a hostage situation. The wedding was being largely funded by the groom's family, wealthy, status-obsessed people who apparently saw this as some sort of high society event, which only made Emma more controlling. Every little detail had to be perfect. Every guest had to meet her ridiculous requirements. The dress code alone was insane. Men had to wear specific designer brands. No exceptions. The suits had to be tailored. The shoes had to be a certain style. Even the accessories were dictated. It wasn't just wear something formal. It was you will wear this exact outfit, or you're not coming. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't do it. Even if I wanted to, I just couldn't. Taking time off work, spending thousands of dollars, dealing with Emma's endless demands, it wasn't feasible. I told her, I kept it straightforward, no drama. Emma, I'm really happy for you, but I can't afford this. It's too much. I can come to the wedding itself, but I can't commit to everything else. Cue meltdown. She lost it. Screaming, crying, calling me selfish. You don't even care about me. You're ruining my wedding. My parents, they backed her up instantly. Your sister only gets married once. My mom said, you should want to be there for all of it. This is what family does, my dad added. It's not about the money, it's about showing up. Right, easy to say when it's not their money being spent. I stood firm. I'll come to the wedding, but that's all I can do. And that was not the right answer. Within hours, my phone was flooded. Family group chat, exploding. Cousins weighing in, aunts sending guilt-trippy messages. Some straight up telling me I was being petty. Others privately messaging me, saying they also felt pressured but weren't brave enough to say no.
And the best part?
My parents went straight for the nuclear option. If you don't go, Emma will never forgive you. Do you really want to destroy your relationship over this? Ah, the classic guilt trip. But something clicked. I realized this wasn't my problem. This wasn't about me not wanting to go. It was about them expecting me to bend over backward like I always had. Like I was supposed to sacrifice my own time, money, and energy just to avoid upsetting them. And I was done. So I made my decision. I told Emma no. No to the rehearsals. No to the spa days. No to the absurd spending. I wasn't going, not because I didn't care, but because I refused to be guilted into bankrupting myself for one day of her life. And that was unforgivable. The group chat turned into a war zone. Some relatives backed me, but most sided with Emma. My parents wouldn't speak to me. My sister cut me off. Fine by me, because for the first time in a long time, I put myself first, and it felt damn good. The wedding day came and went. I spent it at home ignoring my phone. No calls, no messages, no checking social media. Just me, a pizza, and a few episodes of whatever mindless show I could find. I knew the family group chat was probably on fire, but I wasn't about to dive into that disaster. The next morning, my phone looked like it had been set on fire. Hundreds of missed calls and messages. The family chat was a mess of furious texts, long guilt-ridden paragraphs, and passive-aggressive one-liners. Emma had apparently wasted no time telling everyone that I had abandoned her on her most important day. I scrolled through the messages without responding. Wow, can't believe you did this to your own sister. You embarrassed the whole family. You will regret this one day. Mark my words. And then, of course, my mom's classic guilt trip. We saved a seat for you. Emma kept looking at it, hoping you'd walk in, but you never did. Yeah, not falling for that one. Then came Emma's social media meltdown. A long, dramatic post filled with vague attention-seeking lines about real family and cutting out toxic people. She didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. At first, the comments were a war zone, filled with sympathy and agreement. But as weeks passed, I noticed a shift, fewer comments, less engagement, some people even questioning why she was still talking about it. Her audience wasn't gone, but it was definitely thinning. Her friends, who I barely knew, flooded the post with sympathy. Omgi, you don't need fake family like that. So sorry you had to go through this. Some people just don't know how to be supportive. I hope they know they missed out on the best day of your life. Even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years jumped in. Disgusting behavior. Can't believe OP did this. Then there were the DMs. Emma's bridesmaids. Random cousins. Even people who weren't at the wedding, all throwing their 2 cents in. Why couldn't you just suck it up for one day? She's your sister, you should have been there no matter what. Honestly, you were so selfish. Hope it was worth it. It was relentless. Then, the phone call from my parents came. My mom wasted no time. Furious, telling me I had embarrassed the family, saying that Emma was humiliated in front of the groom's side, who apparently started asking why I wasn't there. What were we supposed to tell them? That our own son refused to show up for his sister's wedding? Well, yeah, the groom's family was confused. Apparently, they didn't know much about me, but when they noticed one sibling missing, they started whispering, asking questions. And of course Emma fed into the drama. So now, I wasn't just the bad brother in my own family. I was the family embarrassment in front of wealthy in-laws. Then, before I could even hang up, Emma blocked me. Phone, blocked. Texts, blocked. Social media, blocked. At least for a while. A few weeks later she unblocked me, probably just to check if I had reached out, only to eventually start messaging me directly again. But here's the thing, she still wasn't done. Wedding pictures surfaced. I ignored them at first, but eventually curiosity won. I clicked through the posts, expecting to see a miserable, devastated bride. Nope, she looked perfectly happy, smiling, laughing, posing with family members. The wedding went on without a hitch, and from the looks of it, I wasn't even missed. So much for ruining her day. Meanwhile, family members were choosing sides. Some cousins messaged me privately, saying they understood why I didn't go but were too scared to say anything. Others straight up cut me off. Even my brother, who had also complained about the wedding's costs, got dragged into the mess. He tried to stay neutral, but Emma lashed out at him too. So what? You agree with him? You're both terrible brothers. Even when he tried to stay out of it, she pulled him into the fire. Then came the final straw. Emma's best friends, people I had barely spoken to in my entire life, started DMing me. You're actually so immature. You broke her heart. Family is forever. I can't believe you do this to her. As if I owed them an explanation. And after all that, I started to wonder if I had actually made a mistake. The backlash was insane. The entire family turned into a mob. All because I refused to be guilt-tripped into a wedding I couldn't afford. So, I did what any modern, frustrated person would do. I vented online. I didn't expect much. Just needed to get it out. So I wrote a post about the whole thing, the expectations, the guilt trips, the backlash. I posted it, closed my phone, and didn't think about it again, until the next morning. The post had blown up. Thousands of upvotes. Hundreds of comments. People relating to it. People telling their own stories. Some even saying, "This made me feel less alone." For the first time since this mess started, I realized, it wasn't me, it was them, and I wasn't the only one dealing with this kind of family dynamic. So, if they wanted to cut me off, fine, let them, because I wasn't going back. The wedding was over, but the drama was just getting started. A few days after my Reddit post went viral, my inbox was flooded, not just from strangers online, but from family members. Some messages were supportive, cousins quietly admitting they wished they had the guts to say no like I did. A few distant relatives, saying they always thought Emma was a brat, but most, not supportive. You could have put aside your ego for one day. I hope you realize what you've done. You're the only one who ruined this wedding. That last one, straight from my mom. Meanwhile, Emma kept the silent treatment going. Not a single word from her directly. Just dramatic posts, indirect shots on social media, and making it loud and clear to everyone else that she no longer considered me part of the family. And yet, somehow that wasn't even the craziest part. A cousin reached out and dropped a bombshell. I wasn't the only one who backed out. Turns out, other family members, ones Emma actually likes, also couldn't afford to attend. A few aunts and uncles quietly sent their regrets. Some cousins skipped it too. And guess what? Emma wasn't mad at them. She only had a problem with me because I didn't just say no. I stood my ground. I didn't make excuses or try to soften the blow. I just told her the truth. I couldn't afford it, and I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped. That, unforgivable. The family rumor mill kicked into high gear. One cousin messaged me privately, "Just so you know, they're telling people you didn't go out of pure spite. Not because I couldn't afford it. Not because of my job obligations. Not because I wasn't willing to go bankrupt over a wedding. Nope, according to family gossip, I did it just to hurt Emma, because obviously that's what normal people do. Skip a luxury wedding just for fun." Meanwhile, the siblings group chat exploded. My brother tried to stay neutral, but Emma wasn't having it. She dragged him into the fight, saying if he didn't fully take her side, he was against her. Another sibling tried to mediate. Big mistake. It went from "let's just talk this out" to full-blown accusations. He's selfish. He just wanted attention. He's jealous because Emma's getting married first. Jealous? I had to laugh at that one. Then, the funniest part, I found out through a mutual friend that Emma spent part of her honeymoon complaining about me. She was in some tropical paradise, staying in a luxury resort, sipping expensive cocktails, and she was still talking about how I ruined her wedding. The groom, not happy. Apparently he got annoyed that she was obsessing over me instead of just enjoying their trip. Then, it spilled into my actual life. People I hadn't even spoken to in years started reaching out. Some wanted the full story. Others just wanted to stir the pot. A couple of mutual friends tried to stay neutral, but even they admitted that Emma was making this her whole personality. Then, the official disowning. Emma told everyone she no longer had a brother. I got screenshots of her messages. She was going all in on the victim role, telling people I had abandoned her, that she would never forgive me. At this point, I thought that was the worst of it. Nope. Then, my parents stepped in. One last guilt trip. Apologize, or don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings anymore. That was it. Their final offer. My post on Reddit got some traction, enough that I saw others who had been in similar situations. It didn't go viral overnight, but slowly, more people resonated with it. And for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. I had a choice. Cave in and tell Emma what she wanted to hear, or stick to my decision and accept that I was officially the villain in their story. I didn't even hesitate. I wasn't apologizing. Meanwhile, online, my Reddit post, it kept growing. Thousands of upvotes. Hundreds of comments. People telling their own stories. Some even thanking me for showing them they weren't alone. Even messages from strangers saying they went no contact with toxic family members because of my post. That was wild. Emma's friends attack. Again, apparently, the post made its way back to Emma's circle. Suddenly, Her friends were all over social media posting vague, bitter rants about attention seekers and people who air family business online. One even DM'd me directly. Hope your internet fame was worth destroying your family. Because yes, obviously I orchestrated this entire situation for a couple of Reddit upvotes. Right. Then, out of nowhere my dad called. For the first time since this whole thing started, he actually admitted something. Emma had been impossible during the wedding planning. She was demanding. She was throwing tantrums. He had noticed. But, she's your sister. Sometimes you just have to keep the peace. There it was. The classic keeping the peace excuse. The same excuse that always meant one thing. Let Emma do whatever she wants, and the rest of us just have to deal with it. No thanks. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, Emma went full nuclear. She posted a video, a full-on camera breakdown, crying about family betrayal and how she would never forgive me. I just don't understand how someone who's supposed to love you could do this. The captions, all dramatic. Betrayed by my own blood. Some people will never understand loyalty. Of course, the comments were filled with support. Her friends hyping her up. Strangers telling her she was better off without toxic people in her life. And that was it. That was her final move. Publicly, permanently, and officially making me the villain. Fine by me, because at this point, I was done playing the game. The silent treatment started immediately. My parents, who used to call every couple of days, just stopped. No texts, no check-ins. If I reached out, they'd respond with short, clipped messages, just enough to say they weren't outright ignoring me, but the message was clear. They were siding with Emma. A few days later, I found out through a cousin that there had been a big family dinner. Not just a casual meetup, one of those gatherings where everyone was invited. Siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, even some extended relatives I barely knew. Everyone except me. No message, no invite. The same family who used to guilt trip me about putting family first had no problem cutting me out the second I stopped doing what they wanted. At this point, I wasn't even surprised. Scrolling through social media, I came across Emma's honeymoon posts, tropical beaches, 5-star resorts, expensive champagne, and of course, her signature passive-aggressive captions, surround yourself with those who truly love you. Some people show their true colors when you need them most. Grateful for the ones who actually support me. Nothing direct, but clear enough that people knew who she was talking about. The comments were full of sympathy, friends hyping her up, relatives piling on with messages like, "You deserve better, sweetie." Then a cousin who actually attended the wedding messaged me. Apparently, Emma had told the groom's family that I abandoned her right before the wedding. Just straight up rewrote history. No mention of the money issues, the demands, the impossible expectations. Just a dramatic sob story about how her cruel brother didn't care about her. The best part, even some of the groom's family started questioning the story. Because apparently, Emma's entire personality during the wedding was complaining about me. Instead of focusing on her husband or, her actual wedding, she was ranting about how I wasn't there. Then came the next big demand. A text from my mom, short, simple, and completely one-sided. The only way to fix this is to apologize to Emma and admit you were wrong. That was it. No discussion, no compromise. Just a clear do this, or you're out. I didn't even bother responding. Later my dad called. Unlike my mom, he was a little more reasonable. He didn't yell, he didn't guilt trip. He even admitted that Emma had been a little dramatic about the whole thing. But then, the same old line came up, just smooth things over, keep the family together. Because that was always the solution. It didn't matter who was right or wrong. It didn't matter that Emma had turned me into a villain just to get sympathy. The only thing that mattered was that I was the one expected to fix it. I told him no. Then Emma's friends started trying to get involved. One of them messaged me directly, saying, "You really broke your sister's heart. Just say sorry, man." Like I owed her an explanation. Like I was just supposed to ignore everything and take the fall because that's what Emma wanted. Meanwhile, my original Reddit post was still blowing up. Thousands of upvotes. Even more comments than before. People calling out how ridiculous the situation was, sharing their own stories of entitled family members, telling me not to give in. And then, it got worse. Some of my childhood friends, people I had zero issues with, started treating me differently. Suddenly, I wasn't being invited to things. Conversations were weirdly short. Turns out, Emma had gotten to them too. She was telling people I had always been jealous of her, that I had done this on purpose just to ruin her big day. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was spreading. My brother finally lost patience with her. He had stayed neutral for as long as possible, but even he admitted that Emma had made the wedding miserable for everyone. Constant tantrums. Demanding perfection. Treating everyone like her employees instead of family. Even our grandparents, who usually stayed out of drama, reached out. They didn't understand why everything had become so intense. They just wanted people to move on. And then, the final insult. I checked my phone one night and saw that I had been removed from the family group chat. Not left the chat. Removed. Emma had made a new group. One where I didn't exist. At that moment, I realized something. I wasn't arguing with them anymore. I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't invited to the conversations where they attacked me, but I wasn't really erased either. If anything, I had become their favorite subject whenever they needed someone to blame. So I did the only thing I could do. I stopped engaging. I threw myself into work. If my parents weren't speaking to me, fine. If Emma wanted to keep playing the victim, Fine. If the family wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from an aunt I didn't expect to hear from. She was one of the neutral ones, always polite, never one to take sides. Her message, just wanted you to know you did the right thing. Emma will calm down eventually. That was it. Short, simple, and completely unexpected. Because for the first time in this entire mess, someone in the family actually admitted it. I wasn't the problem. And that was all I needed to hear. Emma wasn't done. If anything, she had just shifted tactics. The wedding drama had started dying down. People had moved on. But Emma, she needed the spotlight back. And she found a way to get it. I found out through a cousin that Emma and my mom had been going around telling the extended family that I had cut ties with them, not that they had pushed me away, not that they had given me an ultimatum, just that I had abandoned them completely. And that wasn't even the worst part. The story had changed. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. Now, according to Emma, this was about me being selfish my entire life. Apparently, I had always been too focused on work and too obsessed with money to care about the family. I wasn't just the brother who skipped her wedding. I was now the selfish, cold-hearted sibling who had been ignoring them for years. A few cousins reached out, confused, asking why I was abandoning the family. I was done being shocked at this point, but still, it was wild how fast Emma had twisted the narrative. Somehow, she had taken a single wedding decision and turned it into my entire personality. Then, my parents made their next move. A long, dramatic message landed in my inbox. If you don't fix this, you might not be welcome home for the holidays. Right, because that was going to make me come running back. I ignored it, then I noticed something weird on social media. A few of Emma's friends, people I had never even spoken to, were making vague, mocking posts. Some people really show their true colors when it matters. Family isn't just about blood, it's about loyalty. Imagine prioritizing money over your own sister. I didn't even have to check. I knew exactly who they were talking about. Emma had turned this into a full-on smear campaign. Meanwhile, my brother, the only sibling who wasn't losing his mind, was beyond frustrated. He had tried to stay neutral as long as possible, but even he had reached his limit. He warned me that Emma wasn't letting this go anytime soon, and that things were probably going to get worse. Then came the next move. Emma's birthday. Normally I'd be invited. Every year there was a big dinner with the family. Even when we weren't close, I was still included. This year, nothing. Not a word, no invite. Just more pictures posted online. Another event where everyone was there except me. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about completely cutting me out. Then, a cousin dropped a bombshell. Emma had set conditions for me to be forgiven. I wouldn't just have to apologize to her. I would have to make a public apology in front of the entire family. Stand there, in front of everyone, and admit that I was wrong. And until that happened, I was officially dead to her. I laughed when I heard that, because at this point, it was beyond delusional. Then, in the most unexpected twist, I got a message from someone I never thought I'd hear from. The groom's mother. She messaged me privately. She wasn't rude, but she was clearly tiptoeing around the subject. She said she had heard about the situation and that Emma was a bit much sometimes. Then came the real reason she messaged. Maybe you should just apologize to keep the peace. That was it. That was the whole message. She wasn't defending Emma. She wasn't attacking me. She was just tired. Even the groom's family was sick of it. And that was the moment I realized how deep this mess really went. Emma wasn't just annoying me. She was wearing down everyone around her. But I wasn't playing this game. I didn't respond. Then, my parents made their final move. Another message landed in my inbox. We've decided it's best if you don't come to Thanksgiving this year. We don't want tension at the dinner table. They had officially uninvited me, and that was it. I was out. No more family events. No more group chats. No more pretending to keep the peace. I threw myself into work. I had already been using my job as an escape. But now, it was home. I started considering moving even further away. If I wasn't part of the family anymore, what was even keeping me here? Then, out of nowhere, a message popped up from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A random distant relative. Short. Simple. Your sister has always been dramatic. Ignore her. That was it. That was all they said. And somehow that single sentence meant more than anything else I had heard in months. Because it meant that people saw through it. It meant that no matter how loud Emma got, not everyone was buying it. But the damage was done. I wasn't just the brother who missed her wedding anymore. I was the villain of the entire family. And for the first time, I started wondering, was standing my ground worth losing my family forever? The fallout wasn't slowing down. If anything, it was getting worse. But this time, not for me. A cousin messaged out of nowhere. Apparently, Emma had started crying in front of family members every time my name came up. At first, it got her sympathy. The aunts and uncles comforted her, telling her how awful it was that I had turned my back on the family. But after a while, people started getting tired of it. The constant dramatics, the emotional breakdowns, the way she brought up the same story over and over, it wasn't hitting the same anymore. Then I heard something I didn't expect, but probably should have. Emma's husband had been showing signs of frustration even during the wedding planning. A cousin who had attended the wedding mentioned that he had rolled his eyes at a few of Emma's tantrums. But now, he was done playing along. At first he played the supportive husband role, listening to her complain, agreeing that I was a terrible brother, but now, he was over it. she was still bringing it up on a daily basis. The wedding was long over, the marriage had started, and she was still obsessing over me. According to what I heard, he finally snapped and told her to move on. That didn't go over well. Emma responded the way she always does, by making it an even bigger deal. She went to my parents and gave them an ultimatum. If OP isn't cut off, I'm done visiting. That was it. Her final move. She was forcing their hand. Either I apologized, or she was going to pull away from them too. And my parents? They panicked. I woke up to another message from them. This time it wasn't demanding an apology, it was begging. Just say something nice to her. Just try to fix this. We don't want to lose our daughter. That was it. That was their priority. Not right or wrong, not fairness, just keeping Emma happy at all costs. I ignored it. Meanwhile, Emma's friends started losing interest. The same people who had defended her endlessly after the wedding were starting to divide into two camps. Some were still backing her, but others had begun pulling away. At first, they hyped her up, sending messages of support and posting vague indirects about fake family. But the thing about drama, people get bored. And Emma? She didn't realize she was pushing even her closest friends away with her obsession. The same rants, the same complaints, the same sob story. One by one, her friends started moving on. Thanksgiving came. My first real holiday alone. I stayed home, made something quick to eat, and watched a movie. No texts from my parents. No last-minute invitations. A few days later, a cousin let something slip. The family Thanksgiving was a disaster. Apparently, I wasn't the only one missing. A few extended relatives had gotten so sick of the tension that they didn't show up either. They weren't even taking my side. They were just tired of the constant drama. Emma's social media meltdown continued. But now, fewer people were engaging. The sympathy comments were dying down. The supportive reactions were less frequent. It was just Emma posting vague, passive-aggressive rants into the void. Then, the shift started happening. My brother, who had tried to stay neutral, started getting worn down. First, he avoided taking sides. Then, he quietly stopped engaging in Emma's rants. But after months of relentless pressure, he finally messaged me, basically saying, just apologize and fix things. This is getting ridiculous. That was when I realized how deep Emma's manipulation really went. She had worn down everyone. Not just me, not just my parents, but even the sibling who had been trying to stay out of it. I didn't respond. Then, the family group chat imploded. The same group that had existed for years, the one where all major family events were planned, the one where people shared updates and photos, it was gone. Not because of me. Because the infighting got so bad that people started leaving one by one. At first, it was just a few cousins. Then, an uncle left. Then, an aunt. Finally, someone just deleted the whole thing. The family literally could not handle itself anymore. Then, in the biggest surprise yet, the groom's parents reached out to me. Not publicly, not in some dramatic way, but privately, through a short, simple message. They basically said they didn't agree with Emma's behavior, that they thought she was being a little extreme, that they understood why I didn't go. But the most interesting part, they were worried. Because even though they were her in-laws, they were starting to see what I had been dealing with all these years. Then, Emma's perfect reputation started cracking. A few relatives started seeing through the act. Some of the aunts who had originally backed her up were now quietly stepping away. It wasn't a full-on shift yet. It wasn't a total turning point. But it was the first real sign that things were changing. Then, another cousin told me something shocking. Emma was privately complaining that the wedding drama had permanently damaged her relationships. Apparently, she was starting to regret how big she made this. But the problem, she couldn't back down now. She had spent too much time playing the victim, and too many people had heard her side. She couldn't just drop it without admitting that she had gone too far. Then came the final sign that things were shifting. For the first time since this all started, my parents hesitated. The usual apologize now messages stopped. The usual fix this before it's too late. Guilt trips didn't come. They were starting to realize they had backed the wrong person. Then, in the final dramatic twist, Emma finally gave up. She told some family members that she didn't care about me anymore, and that she was done trying to get an apology. But this wasn't acceptance. This was damage control. Because even though she was acting like she had moved on, the reality was, she lost. And for the first time, I wasn't the one on the outside anymore. Emma wasn't done. Even after claiming she was moving on, she was still bringing me up at every family gathering. A cousin messaged me after a recent dinner, saying Emma had yet another meltdown. Full-on ranting, near tears, talking about how I had ruined her wedding, and how she would never forget the betrayal. But this time, people weren't buying it anymore. No sympathy, no comforting words, just awkward silence and a few eye rolls. A couple of relatives even changed the subject mid-rant, pretending they didn't hear her. Then, something even more shocking happened. My parents finally snapped. For months, they had been backing her up, guilt-tripping me, telling me to fix things. But now, even they had enough. At another gathering, my mom, the same person who begged me to apologize, told Emma to drop it already. Even my dad, who had always played the peacekeeper, told her she needed to stop making everything about me. Apparently, she did not take that well. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Emma. It wasn't an apology. Not even close. She told me she was willing to forgive me if I admitted I was wrong. I didn't even respond. At this point, I wasn't playing this game anymore. Then, I started noticing something else. Cousins who had once been on her side were slowly pulling away. At first, they had been her biggest defenders. Some even messaged me after the wedding, telling me I had been selfish. But now, they were going quiet. Turns out, even they were tired of hearing about it. One cousin told me Emma had tried to complain about me again, but halfway through, someone interrupted with, "We get it, move on." The real kicker, the groom's parents were over it too. I heard through family that they had started telling people they didn't understand why Emma was still upset. The wedding was long over. The honeymoon was done. They had a new life together. But Emma was still obsessed with the drama. "It's getting embarrassing." That's what they told relatives. And just like that, Emma's influence started crumbling. People stopped engaging with her complaints. Her rants got shorter. The support messages slowed down. And then, something I never expected, my parents reached out again. This time, no guilt tripping. No demands for an apology. Just a simple message. They missed me. They wanted to see me. For the first time in months, they weren't pushing Emma's narrative. Meanwhile, Emma was still trying to make a scene online, posting her usual passive-aggressive captions about fake family. But something was different. Almost no one liked or commented. Before, she would get dozens of messages hyping her up, validating her victim act. Now, crickets. Then came the real bombshell. A mutual friend, someone who had stayed neutral this whole time, randomly messaged me. Apparently, Emma had been trash-talking not just me, but almost everyone. The friend sent screenshots of Emma talking behind the backs of multiple family members, complaining about her cousins, bad-mouthing an aunt, even making fun of one of her closest friends. She wasn't just playing the victim, she was burning every bridge around her. I didn't do anything with the screenshots. I didn't need to, because by then, Emma was already losing people. Then came a small cousin's birthday party. I decided to go. Not because I wanted to stir anything up, but because I missed my cousins and I wasn't going to keep isolating myself. I expected awkwardness. I expected people to pick sides. But instead, it was fine. A few people were surprised to see me, but acted normal. No drama, no tension, no one brought up the wedding. People had moved on. Then the biggest rumor yet started swirling. Emma's husband was reaching his breaking point. Apparently, the groom was getting exhausted by Emma's obsession with me. The constant complaining, the social media posts, the crying fits. What started as supporting his wife had turned into dealing with non-stop negativity, and now, even he was getting sick of it. Then came the last twist I never expected. My parents apologized. Not a fake apology. Not "we're sorry you felt that way." A real apology. They admitted they had gotten caught up in the wedding stress and handled things badly. They didn't ask me to apologize. They didn't pressure me to fix things. They just said they should have listened sooner. That was it. No dramatic reunion. No big emotional scene. But for the first time, I felt like they were actually seeing things for what they were. And then I realized, Emma was alone. The friends who had hyped her up, gone. The cousins who had backed her, silent. Even her husband was starting to lose patience. Her entire support system had started falling apart, and for the first time, I felt completely at peace with my decision to skip the wedding. Because after everything, I wasn't the one who lost my family. Emma was. The wedding was over, the dust had settled, but Emma was still fighting a war that no one cared about anymore. A cousin casually mentioned that Emma and her husband had been arguing. A lot. The honeymoon phase had ended, and apparently, the groom was done hearing about the wedding drama. He had defended her at first, played the supportive husband role, but after months of constant complaining, passive-aggressive posts, and emotional breakdowns about how I betrayed her, he was over it. He had started telling her to drop it. That didn't sit well with Emma. Then came the next blow. Her friend group started shrinking. The same people who had been hyping her up, defending her, messaging me with insults, they had started drifting away. Turns out, nobody wanted to be around someone who only talked about the same issue over and over again. It wasn't a big dramatic fallout. They just stopped engaging with her posts, stopped replying instantly, stopped inviting her to things. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to be around a person who's obsessed with playing the victim. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents went back to normal. Not overnight. There was no big conversation or moment of closure. It was slow. A message here, a casual call there. Then one day, it was like the whole thing never happened. No forced apologies. No guilt trips. No more fix things with your sister lectures. It was as if they had finally realized that the problem was never me. Emma, of course, kept up the act online. She posted about her perfect marriage, her amazing life, the best decision she ever made by cutting out toxic people. But behind the scenes, it wasn't as perfect as she made it seem. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make her life look better than it actually was. Meanwhile, family gatherings stopped being awkward. At first, there was hesitation. Would people take sides? Would things feel weird? But then, nothing happened. I showed up, and everyone acted normal. No whispers, no judgmental stares, no awkward small talk about the wedding. It was like everyone silently agreed to move on. Except for Emma. She tried one last time to demand an apology. She sent a long message, one of those fake "I'm willing to forgive you" texts. She needed closure. She wanted to heal. But only if I admitted I was wrong. I ignored it. And after that, Silence. Even her in-laws had started keeping their distance. A cousin mentioned that the groom's parents barely interacted with Emma's side anymore. At first, they had been involved, trying to smooth things over. Now, they didn't bother. It wasn't hostility, it was just exhaustion. Then came Emma's birthday disaster. She planned a huge party for herself. Big venue, fancy decorations, invitations sent weeks in advance. Barely anyone showed up. A few family members went out of obligation, but most people made excuses. Nobody wanted to deal with the dramatics. Then, at a different gathering, someone joked about the whole thing. A relative, one of the ones who had stayed neutral, laughed and said, Emma's wedding lasted one day, but the drama lasted longer than the marriage. People laughed. Not in a cruel way. But in that, yeah, this whole thing was ridiculous way. And in that moment, I realized something. People weren't just done with the drama. They were making fun of it. Emma had spent a year playing the victim, trying to control the narrative, trying to make me look like the villain. And in the end, she became the joke. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I focused on work. I traveled. I spent time with friends who actually cared about me. I built a life without family stress, guilt trips, or obligations I never signed up for. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. No regrets. No second guessing, just peace. And Emma, she was still trying to convince everyone that she had won. But in reality, she had already lost. After a year of silence, Emma messaged out of nowhere. No build-up, no warning. Just a notification on my phone. Her name staring back at me after all this time. The tone? Weirdly polite. No insults. No passive-aggressive guilt trips. Just a calm, almost formal message saying she wanted to clear the air and talk. It was so out of character that I didn't even respond. I didn't trust it. Then, a cousin filled me in on what was really happening. Emma and her husband were separating. Apparently, things had been bad for months. The groom had finally reached his breaking point and moved out. The reason? He couldn't take it anymore. The non-stop need for attention. The social media dramatics. The way she made everything about herself, even in their marriage. And now, she was alone. Her friends had moved on. The family had stopped catering to her tantrums. And now her marriage had collapsed. That's why she was reaching out. Not because she suddenly wanted peace. Not because she missed me, but because she needed an audience again. I ignored the message. A few days later, she sent another one. This time, the dramatics were cranked up. She talked about how hard this year had been, how she just wanted to make things right, how she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her. But the apology? It wasn't about me. It was all about her. How much she had struggled, how she felt abandoned, how she wished people could understand what she had gone through. It wasn't an apology, it was a plea for sympathy, and I wasn't falling for it. Then, I got another unexpected update from the groom's side. A mutual friend told me that Emma's soon-to-be ex-husband had been venting about the entire marriage. He said he felt like he had married an actress, someone who was always performing for the world, always chasing validation, always making herself the victim. At first, he thought it was just wedding stress. Then he thought she'd settle down after the honeymoon. But a year in, she was still talking about the wedding like it had just happened. And when he finally told her to stop, she turned him into the bad guy too. Now he was done. And Emma? She was spiraling. Her social media posts got more desperate. People abandon you when you need them most. Funny how family doesn't mean what it used to. It's always the ones you least expect. No names, no direct callouts. But it was obvious who she was talking about. And for the first time, the comments weren't on her side. People had stopped playing along. Even family members were divided. Some felt bad for her. Others thought this was inevitable. And my parents? They didn't even try to push me to talk to her anymore. They were tired. They had spent so much time defending her, so much time blaming me. But now, they could finally see what everyone else had started realizing. Emma was the common denominator. She wasn't cut off. She had pushed everyone away. Then, in one last attempt, she started reaching out to other relatives, spinning a new story. This time, she blamed her failed marriage on the family. If my family had been there for me, things wouldn't have fallen apart. I was under so much stress because of OP that it hurt my marriage. If I had real support, I wouldn't be going through this. It was always someone else's fault. I never responded, and eventually, she stopped trying. No more messages, no more attempts to reconnect, no more fake apologies, just silence. And in that silence, I realized something. Skipping the wedding saved me. If I had given in, if I had let myself get guilt-tripped, I would still be stuck in this endless cycle of drama. Instead, I built a life without stress, without guilt, without Emma controlling every conversation. And for the first time in years, I was truly at peace. Emma, she had lost everything trying to control everyone. And me, I had never been happier.